and get started. Thank you all so much for being here today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sailor Guevara, and I'm a spirits specialist, a spirits marketing consultant, and a contributor to several spirits publications. I have over 30 years experience in the hospitality and spirits industry. I began my career behind the bar and quickly found my passion for connecting with people over spirits and drinks. I spent my time building bar programs throughout the US and Europe before I moved to the supplier side. I did spend some time in production as well, but mostly I've been in branding and marketing for emerging and craft brands, and I worked for a few large brands. In 2020, American Whiskey Magazine named me that year's icon of whiskey for my role as a brand ambassador. When I accepted my award, I was absolutely flattered and really appreciative to be recognized amongst my peers for my work. But mostly, I felt confident that if I was marketing myself that well, then I was also marketing my brands well. I'm one of the first mentors for the American Craft Spirit Association internship program. This is probably what I'm most proud of in my career. Through my time as an educator and mentor, I quickly realized that the more I teach, the more I learn. And I love to learn and share, which is why I am here with you all today. So thank you to ADI for asking me to host this webinar. Thank you to all of you who are attending and to those watching later. I would very much like to know what questions you all have for me during this webinar. It's important that you feel you've received quality information. So at any time if you have questions or comments, please use the Q&A feature and don't hesitate to ask. I will keep my eye on it. So let's get down to it. I'm going to raise the question, do you need a brand ambassador? And tell you why I think you do need a brand ambassador. So I have worked for many small brands that didn't succeed, and I've worked for many brands that became very large and successful. And I've also worked with global brands. So I feel that I've gained a perspective on what works and what doesn't. For both large and small brands, of course, the target is the same. However, with a world that moves as fast as ours does right now, the target may be the same, but flexibility and, dare I say, the dreaded word pivoting are key in building and maintaining a strong brand presence. A brand ambassador should leave an indelible impression on the hearts and minds of consumers. So as you're building your distillery or your brand, are you thinking about your marketing plan? Are you considering what type of outreach you will need? So today I'm going to focus on two central questions that I believe are crucial to this topic, and then I'm happy to answer any of your questions. So one, do I need a brand ambassador? And two, can I afford a brand ambassador? So let's start with the first question. I believe every brand should have an ambassador. Every brand needs representation. Every day a new consumer turns 21, and every day, for our purposes, a consumer either ages out of drinking or stops drinking. The new consumers probably don't have a relationship with your brand, and the former consumers won't be returning. So it's critical to continue to share your brand message most effectively with new consumers, no matter how successful you currently are. Knowing what type of representation your brand needs, well, that depends on your circumstances. Are you in a control state? What is the size of your market? What type of distribution do you have? And what are your goals for distribution? Do your goals include national chains, for example? What does your sales and marketing plan look like? Your answers to these questions, they're going to help you determine what type of representation will work for you initially, but be prepared, again, to pivot quickly when needed. And that's usually a lot easier for smaller craft brands. So knowing your immediate goals and having a solid vision of how you want to grow your brand is vital to the decision to take on a brand ambassador. And each brand's idea of success is going to be different. Also, something really important that I want to mention, something that I feel is incredibly important for all brands to be considering at this time, is that there is an entire sector of the American population that is unrepresented in spirits marketing. Many new studies are looking outside of the male whiskey consumer base finally, and those studies are revealing that women represent almost 30 to 36% of whiskey drinkers in the United States. And that's up from 15% in the 1990s. still on the rise. So, in addition to being consumers, women are also responsible for up to 70% of alcohol purchasing decisions for the home. This data is huge, and I believe everyone in capitals should be shifting their marketing to be approachable to women and plenty of non genderized marketing. So ask yourself, is your brand approachable to women and minorities? Are you targeting women and minorities in your marketing and your outreach? Do you have relationships with your local female driven and minority whiskey groups, like Women Who Whiskey, Black Bourbon Society, or Bourbon Women? Do you see diversity in your own organization that reflects your community? Who you choose as your representative should be a reflection of your community, and they should also help you gain access to those underrepresented groups. This is really important when considering how you want to hire and who you want to have representing your brand, which is why I bring this up. So let's talk about short-term sales activation marketing to get more leads and sales from people who are looking to buy versus a focus on building your reputation and brand awareness. So sales activation marketing is short-term. It's immediate influx of sales, which is great and important. Brand building marketing is a much longer investment curve. You may not get immediate sales, but you are changing the perception of consumers and future consumers. So, done right, brand building marketing has the highest possible ROI because once you build that relationship and awareness, it doesn't decay. Your reputation and that relationship persists. So, this is a long term strategy that's really important. So that's not to say that a brand ambassador can't also create short-term ROI. They certainly can. But most importantly, they are solidifying your brand for the future. Visibility. Visibility is key. A representative can help you with that. Consistent and repeated. Successful brands are consistently visible. And this is where, again, a brand ambassador is critical if you don't have millions of dollars to pour into marketing and advertising. So, what's the mix needed between sales activation and brand building? It seems most experts believe it should be a 40 to 60 ratio, with that 60% being in brand building. And the quality of your marketing and outreach should be interesting. Your brand ambassador should be knowledgeable, they should be an interesting person, they should be well spoken, someone who's not easy to forget. And don't worry about your brand ambassador eclipsing your brand. This has come up a lot in my past career, and I can tell you that if that was a risk, no one would ever use celebrities in their marketing and advertising, of course. So go with someone that's unforgettable. I worked in a small distillery in Southwest Ohio about 10 years ago. And to this day, I will tell you, I still receive messages on social media with photos of people holding bottles that they just purchased from that distillery or describing the experience they had visiting that distillery again. So not only are they remembering me, but obviously they are remembering that distillery, which is most important. These consumers are excited to share with me that they're still connected to that brand. And I consider that a huge success because that means I built longevity for that brand. I built a long term consumer for that brand. So, another question that comes up is should you just put the majority of your focus on sales inside the distillery? That really depends on a lot of factors. Did you build a destination distillery with the intention of focusing on inside and local sales? If you did, okay. Does the distillery traffic get you to where you want to be financially? If the answer is yes, then great, do that. If you aren't interested in outside sales or wide distribution, by all means, keep doing what you do best. It's working for you. Perhaps all you really need then is to have consistent advertising to bring folks into your distillery. However, if you have built your distillery with the intention of building a widely distributed brand, then I believe you need a brand ambassador. And I want to stress one point that's really critical. You probably have a distillery that welcomes guests in for tours. So This is a great revenue source, right? Maybe you serve cocktails, you're generating income from distillery visits, and maybe you serve food. This can be intoxicating as you gain more popularity. Forgive the pun. But there's a risk there. The risk is getting into the bar business versus being in the business of selling spirits. And I can assure you that they are two very, very different things. This is a trap that I have seen so many people fall into. So I really caution this when I'm consulting with brands. So ask yourself a question. Do you want to be a bar owner or do you want to be a distiller? It's important to know that answer for yourself. Do you have time to focus on outreach and brand building in addition to running a distillery and a bar? Again, this is a dangerous trap that you should try and stay away from. So, another component that I want to talk about is education. Education is key. Most American consumers are still not knowledgeable about spirits. This situation has greatly improved since I began working in the industry for sure. But for the most part, consumers still don't know what a spirit is made from, how it's made, and why that's important, especially underserved consumers and new consumers. So, although maybe right now the majority of people coming into your distillery are very knowledgeable because usually the whiskey or spirit nerds find you first, that does not mean that your entire consumer base is knowledgeable. So I'm still amazed when I find myself explaining to consumers that yes, bourbon can be made anywhere in the continental US. Yes, you can make bourbon outside of Kentucky. It's 2003, and I'm still explaining this just to underline how critical education is. Why educate your consumers? Well, when consumers understand what they're drinking, they have a deeper connection to it. They might find whiskey, for example, less scary if they know what it is. And there we build that familiarity. And I'm going to give you an example of one of my own experiences. So during my career, I worked for an emerging Tennessee whiskey brand, and leadership early on found out that they were going to have to educate consumers on what Tennessee whiskey really is to change the consumer perspective of what Tennessee whiskey should taste like. You would not believe this very, very fraught path that was ahead of us. I would find myself holding a bottle of said whiskey, and a consumer would be excited to taste it. Yet, the minute they heard that it was a Tennessee whiskey, they would immediately say to me, "No, thank you. I don't like Tennessee whiskey." And when I would ask why, they pointed always to one very large brand and said, "Well, I don't like the taste of that whiskey, so I don't like the taste of any Tennessee whiskey." Smart marketing for that brand to be seen as representing the totality of a state and a style of whiskey, but not great if you don't love the taste of that whiskey. So this wasn't an easy challenge. And what made the situation most difficult is that you never want to insult a consumer. If you wish to change their perception, you have to do that without coming off as a snob or talking down to them. You also don't want to get trapped and bogged down in the mire of a very polarizing subject, which Tennessee whiskey, as an example, can be. Same with craft spirits. Is Tennessee whiskey, bourbon, yes or no, et cetera, et cetera. It's a rabbit hole. And same with craft spirits. You know, we still have this perception, unfortunately, with American consumers that craft spirits are too young. The person behind the brand doesn't know what they're doing yet. You know, even though some of our craft whiskey right now is aged longer than the big boys on the shelf. We still have that perception. So, changing consumer perception is an art form and should probably be a part of your marketing if you are a small emerging craft brand, and especially if you're making something that is not common, like a vodka or a whiskey or a gin or a rum. I've worked with a distillery that makes honey spirits, and it's a real challenge to be able to figure out how to articulate what a honey spirit is, how to handle your education in your marketing, and invite people into this new category. So that's an important function of your brand ambassador. So going back to that Tennessee whiskey, during my time with the brand, I witnessed my colleagues getting into these battles. And I decided early on that I would be more successful with a different approach. Instead of getting into heated arguments, or just spending all this time talking about this category, the best way to change a consumer's perspective on whether craft spirits are as good as the big Kentucky brands or whether age matters or whatever it is liquid to lips, tasting and conversing. And I believe that is best done by someone who is not making the spirit in most cases. And that might shock you, and that can create some questions as well, which I'm happy to answer later. I believe it should be done by someone who appears to have no skin in the game. So, for example, I would say to consumers, well, I didn't make the whiskey, I didn't make the gin, so you won't be insulting me. And quickly, I've disarmed that consumer and I have a better chance of getting them into my corner. Instead of arguing over what Tennessee whiskey was, I would just ask consumers to taste the whiskey and then decide if they liked it. Because ultimately, the biggest reasons a consumer will purchase the spirit and make repeated purchases are taste and connection. All right, let's talk a little bit about cocktails. Very, very important for spirit brands. In one of my early roles as a brand ambassador, I represented a small whiskey brand. And when I hosted events for this brand, at the time, the audience was usually made up of 99% men. And if the audience was mixed, almost all of the women there were with their spouses. They were kind of dragged there, and were not interested in the whiskey. And this is not an unfamiliar story, unfortunately, today. So when I watched other brand ambassadors that had more experience than me leading these tastings and engaging with the audience, I would see them ignore the women in the room. And they were doing so to kind of say, no pressure. So I understand, where that intention was coming from. But the women became invisible, or the person there that wasn't interested in the spirit, they were invisible. And it was nuts to me that I had all these potential consumers in the room who were being ignored. So I figured at the very least, I could give them just some delicious cocktails to sip on while they had to sit through, what was probably very boring to them. And wouldn't you know, I got them to drink whiskey. So cocktails are still, and I believe always will be, a very powerful tool for spirit sales and consumption. And I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new in this realm, but I do want to underline this point because if you don't come from a bar background, if you don't have that experience with cocktails, and especially if your experience has been more, surrounded by people who are, I only drink it neat, and which is fine and delicious, and I do the same, you might not fully understand the importance of cocktails in your marketing and in your brand building. So I believe your brand ambassador should be well versed in cocktails, hopefully a mixologist themselves or a bartender previously or currently. They should understand how bar programming works and be able to create amazing cocktails showcasing your spirit, or have the connections to the people that can do that. So the conversation becomes much more fruitful between your representative and a buyer if they speak the language of bartenders and mixologists. Having a talented mixologist on your team can also help your quality control out in the market and can give you some very important bargaining support for your distributor, which we're going to get into. So a great brand ambassador knows how distributor programming works and has innovative ideas. If they're new to the game and they have all these other amazing qualities and they don't have that piece, I feel they'll learn it quickly. The spirits industry can also be a really accommodating and collaborative place, especially in craft. So ask your fellow distillery owners for help and advice on how their ambassador have succeeded with programming. So programming is another area where creating solid relationships by working together with your distributor reps or buyers will prove powerful and lead to a better ROI. Your ambassador should also have a genuine excitement and passion for the role and your brand, and be really good at relaying that excitement to consumers and buyers. Excitement is infectious. So I used to start off my tastings looking around the room and just reminding myself what it felt like the first time I ever did a tasting and people actually showed up to hear me talk. And I would get really excited and I would tell people that, you guys, I'm so excited to be here with you. I am so excited that we're all sitting down together and we're going to talk about this brand and we're going to taste this brand. This is just really exciting to me. Are you guys excited too? And sure enough, even if it sounded corny, at least most people in the room would be like, yeah, I'm excited. If they weren't before, they were then. So that excitement is really important to convey. So make sure that the person you choose has a personality like that. And as for that bargaining support that I mentioned in reference to cocktails, I'll give you another example from my career. I've created solid, long-lasting relationships with distributor reps all over the country because I understood how difficult their roles were. And if I had the chance to get their attention for my small brand that they don't have time for, of course, I really needed to understand how I could support them. So before I began asking what they could do for me, I asked what I could do for them. So I quickly became the go-to girl for cocktail menus. Anytime a distributor rep asked for my help with cocktail ideas, I would make a trade, legally and responsibly, of course. Wink, wink. I let them know that I would help them scratch my back, or sorry, scratch your back, scratch my back, however that goes. I created friendly relationships and these reps started to care for me. They wanted to see me succeed, which meant my brand was succeeding and I wanted them to succeed. So when it comes to the relationship with your brand ambassador and your distributor, the words out of your brand ambassador's mouth should always be, how can I help? So at this point, I'm kind of nearing the end of question 1. Do you need a brand ambassador? If you guys have any questions right now, it would be a great time. Please use the Q&A and I will stop and answer your questions. And if there aren't any questions, I'm just going to continue along. Okay, so second question, and probably the most important question, I would imagine. I'm sure some of you know or already know that you want to have a brand ambassador. And here's a question real quick. Is there a data bank of whiskey ambassadors in the US okay, you're a Canadian whiskey producer? That's a really great question. So there really isn't a data bank, but I can tell you, I'm so glad you brought this up because I will touch on this later again too. Post-pandemic, so much has changed. I cannot tell you how absolutely nuts it was seeing how many people were laid off during the pandemic and were not brought back afterwards. Also, a lot of people who were laid off, who were brand ambassadors, it was their first time staying home in a long time. That was my experience. I was still a brand ambassador in 2020. We started to recognize how burnt out we were, how tired we were, how much we had been traveling, how much we were sacrificing. And sometimes it's really great and sometimes not so much, especially for the people who were further along in their careers. And so a lot of them decided not to go back to brand work or to be with one brand. So a lot of them are out there right now as independent consultants. So next to my name is my website. I will also make sure you guys have my contact info at the end of this so that you can email me and I can probably help connect you with people that are now independent consultants. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, and then Jeff asks, do you have draft roles and responsibility documents for the brand? Yes. So this is a great question, Jeff. You should absolutely have written down roles and responsibilities for your brand ambassador. And I do have documents like that that are pretty generalized, what they should be doing and what you expect of them. And again, consultants can definitely help you with this. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. So again, after this webinar, please feel free to contact me so I can help get you information like that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about budgets. I have a figure from the SBA that recommends spending 7 to 8% of your gross revenue for marketing and advertising if you're doing less than 5 million a year in sales, and your net profit margin after all expenses is in the 10 to 12% range. So that's what the SBA says. So also, small brands often believe that they can save money by putting their distiller or their owner in the role of brand ambassador. Is your owner or distiller the best person to be your brand ambassador? No. You might be a small team where everyone is wearing many hats. I get that. Still, if I'm asked the question if the owner or distiller should act as the brand ambassador, my answer will always be no. I cannot stress this enough. Yes, consumers want access to the person who founded the brand and or who makes the spirits. Great. That's another important tool your brand ambassador has in their toolbox. Your distiller should be able to spend the majority of their time distilling your spirits, hopefully. Owners should be running their business. You wear enough hats already. Marketing should not be one of them, in my opinion. Owners and distillers should be reserved for special events and used in digital marketing, videos and photos, and distillery visits. But that really should be the extent of it. They should not be the ones doing the pounding of the pavement. Let's see, I have a few more questions here. Do some brand ambassadors work with guaranteed sales and how they will charge their customers? That's a really great question. That is going to be very specific to either how you lay out your expectations, or how they, especially if they're a consultant, how they're going to charge you. A guarantee for brand building is a little tough, right? So that's more to do with sales, which sales will come from brand building, of course. Getting caught up in, is this person making me enough sales initially? It's going to be a little difficult to measure that right away. So I think more importantly, what you're focusing on is the outreach, the quality of outreach that this person is doing for you, the quality of the marketing, the relationship building. Are you seeing your consumer base increase? You might not always see that in your sales channels right away, but you will see that in attendance. And we're going to talk about that as well. So it's a really, really great question. Let me go back just a little bit and let's talk about quality over quantity, which kind of speaks to the question that I just answered. Blitzes should be the exception, not the rule. If you are an emerging brand and spend the time and money to get a chain placement, you may already know how expensive and time consuming that is. Maybe it's a Walmart where you get to kind of bid on those things, or it's a chain liquor store in your state. It is possible that you might sell a lot of cases of your product quickly, or you're just doing it for depletion. I mean, ultimately, that's what you want, of course, is to sell the most amount of your spirits that you possibly can. I want to give you an alternative option for where you might be able to spend that amount of money and time. And then that's for you to decide which you think is more fruitful, of course. So if you have a brand ambassador that's building relationships in your local community with bars, restaurants, and off-premise accounts, they're hosting tastings and spirit events, you're getting a direct path right to that consumer. You get to know who they are and you get to capture them. Sign up for our email list, follow us on social media, come visit our distillery. This is our next event, attend our next event. Your brand ambassador is creating an emotional relationship with that consumer and your brands. So they're more likely to make repeat purchases because they have that emotional connection. There's a shared experience. That's a lot easier to measure than who has bought your bottle from the shelf of Walmart or a Total Wine or et cetera. And do you see those sales repeating? So brand building does not happen by just filling the shelves with your bottles. And I've seen that mistake made a lot. A lot of small brands that would bring me in as a consultant or as an ambassador, and they're like, I don't get it. We have all of this distribution and we've got bottles everywhere, and they're just getting dusty. Don't allow your bottles to get dusty because you don't have the marketing to reach the consumer and create strong consumer demand for your products. So there is the cart before the horse situation sometimes. And I think this is just a really great example. It can be very challenging. Well, let's say it can be exciting first to say, hey, I got this really big placement. And you might have a salesperson working for you that gets measured on that. They might get measured on, how many cases they're selling, or perhaps it's depletion or placements. So that's pretty typical. After that placement is done, then what? What's happening? How are your sales performing? So I mentioned blitzing earlier. Is blitzing best practice? I don't think so. Dropping bottles and exiting the market is not a strategy I believe in. You'll be more successful with someone working in the market where you have distribution. So again, your distributor and on and off premise buyers should feel that you have a relationship with them rather than a wham bam, thank you, ma'am. That doesn't help anybody. As a former buyer for bars and restaurants, I cannot tell you how many bottles and cases of spirits that didn't move that I felt I got stuck with. It harmed not only my relationship with that brand, but also with that distributor rep. Your brand selling well makes your distributor rep successful, and that's really important. Very difficult to change an initial impression. So if you have a buyer at a really great bar and you're so excited to get in there, there's a big bar in your area, and you believe if you put your spirit in there, it's going to do really well. If you just drop that bottle in there without a lot of follow-up, without a lot of branding and marketing support or creating a relationship, and those bottles don't do well, and you don't make the sales for that bar, that buyer now has an idea about your brand that your brand isn't successful, even if it's not your fault, which is really unfair. Okay, let's talk a little bit about technology and efficiency. So I am a big, big proponent of being efficient. I've always been the type of person that does 10,000 things, and I've got all these balls in the air, and I'm terrified to drop any of them. So I've learned how to be really, really efficient. And if you have a great brand ambassador working for you, that's what you are looking for in that person. They should be very efficient. They should care that they are not wasting your company's money. Integrity is really important. With modern technology and the tools we have at our disposal today, it's easier than ever to place brand representation in your budget. So whether you have a consultant who does brand work for you quarterly, perhaps, maybe you just hire them for special releases. There is a distillery that hires someone every quarter to help them manage a new release. Let's say they have, they're coming out with a different flavored gin or something, and they know this is coming up. And they do this maybe 3 times a year or 4 times a year. They only bring on this person to work with them for 2 weeks out of each quarter. So they help with in-person events, they help with virtual events, and they do a lot of social media work and brand building. And that's how this distillery chooses to handle having someone to represent their spirits. And it works really well for them because right now they don't have the budget for a full-time person. So that's absolutely an option. If you can't afford any sort of ambassador yet, but you do have a small budget for someone, highly recommend hiring a local talented mixologist to do work for you. So, for example, there's a superstar, rock star mixologist at a fancy bar in your city or your town or wherever. Um, Approach them and ask them if they would be willing to help you, maybe seasonally or even twice a year, to write cocktail menus for you and to do staff education, maybe at just your key accounts. So either you're paying them per cocktail or you're paying them per menu or per hour, however you want to work it out. Most people behind the bar are looking for a way to get out from behind the bar eventually, but to still stay in the realm of spirits and doing the work that they love and creating cocktails. So this is a great opportunity for them, and it's a great opportunity for you. And it's not going to cost you as much as having someone on your books full time. So when I talk about staff education, that is also a huge part of having a brand ambassador. So a really good brand ambassador is going to go into the places where your spirit is placed, and they're going to educate the people that are responsible for selling it. They're going to educate servers. They're going to educate bartenders. They're going to educate maybe the off-premise buyers or people that might get asked at the counter. And if this is done well, this is a really, really important component of having someone represent you. And especially when you have a mixologist that can help with quality control out into the market, out in your market. So, as I've mentioned, there are many consulting groups out there. Some of them can be very expensive, some of them not so much, especially post pandemic. We have loads of experience and talented people that are now freelancing as consultants. So, if you're concerned that you can't afford a full time employee to represent your brand in the market, there are a lot of alternatives. And in my opinion, we don't have to rely solely on outdated door knocking methods anymore. The virtual space is here to stay. It's much more efficient. And look, we're connecting here right now. So it's working. Recent studies have also shown that consumers still have not returned to on premise at the same rate as pre pandemic. It's something that you must consider in your marketing right now. Will that change? Who knows? Studies are showing that dining in versus taking out is about 50-50 right now. Also something important to consider in your marketing. So, are in-store tastings and on-premise events enough? I don't think so. I believe every brand should have a healthy mix of in-person tastings, in-person events, as well as virtual. Again, there are a lot of companies and a lot of people out there that are now very experienced in running virtual events. And if you partner with the right team to handle your online sales, often you can coordinate those things really, really well. Online sales is a whole other discussion that I don't think we have time for today, but perhaps for a future webinar, kind of just discussing what do you expect to get out of online sales if you're able to do that in your state, and what is the best third party to choose to do that. It's a quagmire. It's very expensive. It's very challenging, but I believe with the addition to virtual events and a strong social media presence, you're still getting liquid to lips. And liquid to lips is the most important thing you can do for your brand. So, yes, having the expense of a brand ambassador can mean not just, their salary, travel expenses, hotels, meals, cars, flights, et cetera, but that's really not necessary anymore for quality brand work. Perhaps you have someone who's working virtually, 60% of their time, and they're physically out in the market traveling 40% of that time. That's going to save you a lot of money. And then the last thing I want to talk about is social media, and then I'll open it up to questions again. Don't ignore social media, please. Social media is a marketing strategy. So putting money into social media, I find that still a lot of small and emerging brands are really hesitant to understand the power of social media. I tell you, create a budget for it and put money into it. So, one, know your objectives. What are your social media objectives? brand awareness, making connections. Know your target audience. Obviously, 21 plus, people in your area. And as you grow, pay attention to who your consumer is because you can target your social media to go right to those people. Be organized to get the most out of your social media. Just posting stuff or having, a niece or the gal that's in the gift shop or whatever, just posting whatever on social media, that's really not going to do the trick. Even if you see some engagement and a lot of followers on there, where is the ROI? Because there should be ROI from social media. Identify which platforms work best for you. TikTok, probably not so much because we're dealing with spirits. Facebook has hundreds of whiskey groups. Some of them have over 10,000 members, and they're long term. Some of these groups have been on Facebook for well over 10 years, and their numbers continue to grow. A lot of the spirit societies all over the US started out as Facebook groups. So pay attention to Facebook. Instagram is a fantastic tool because it's visual. Not only can you post beautiful pictures of your spirits, cocktails with recipes, highlight the locations that are carrying your spirit, but you can also do live events on Instagram. And now with Reels, you have the ability to get even closer to that consumer with videos. So your brand ambassador should have a strong social media presence themselves or a history of success creating content for their brand social media. For small craft brands, often your brand ambassador is the person who runs your social media, and that's absolutely fine by me. So in the end, making your brand familiar to consumers will solidify your space in the market. And you do that with outreach, and you do that by building emotional connections. And to me, that is the key to my success, at least. So I will end it there right now and open up any questions that you may have. I'm here to answer them. Let's see. What do you think are fair measurable factors to gauge a brand ambassador's performance? That's a really, really, really great question. And I'm not going to be able to answer that right now. I think it's really going to depend on what stage are you at? What does your distribution look like? What size of an area of a market are we talking about? Are we talking about national, regional, in-state? Are you a control state? Control states can either be an absolute nightmare or helpful. Depends on the state. The measure really is, again, if you're looking at attendance to events, if you're looking at maybe focusing on smaller placements and seeing how those repeat sales are doing, that's a great way to measure, in my opinion. I think that it really is going to depend on what you're looking to do. And it's also going to depend on the experience that your brand ambassador has. So I would say that's part of the kind of interviewing process, right? That's going to be part of the discussion of getting to know each other and looking at what is the goal, what is the best way to get there, and what is your budget. And then make sure that you agree together. Be very specific at what you're looking for. Let your expert be the expert as you are the expert of your own spirits and your own brand. Give them the room and the space to do what they do best, but definitely work out how you want to measure your ROI and what that will look like. Get it in writing and make sure that you're looking at it however you want to look at it, every 60 days, every quarter, and continue to move the needle if you need to, but definitely be on the same page with that brand ambassador. So hopefully that answered your question. Are there any other questions right now that I can answer? Percentage-wise, how much to spend on sales reps versus ambassador? Very good question. To me, this goes back to the brand building versus sales activations, right? So you want to do both, of course. I believe 60% goes to that ambassador, 40% goes to sales activations. Again, this is kind of a general thing. It also depends on where else are you gaining revenue from? Do you have a distillery where you have revenue coming in? What are all of your revenue channels? What are all of your options and possibilities? Um, what stage are you at? Are you at a point where you need to rebrand and rebuild because your launch didn't go well? That happens, and that is okay. You can absolutely rebuild again with the right people supporting you. Do you have a distributor? Do you not have a distributor? That's going to affect how I answer that question. So again, a lot of this is very, very tailored to where you are specifically and who you are specifically. And a really good consultant can help determine that for you. Can you give people an idea of how long they should have a brand ambassador? 3 months, 6 years, 1 year, until you see results. When should you cut a brand ambassador? Very good question. Um, Jack Daniels has brand ambassadors in the market. So you should always have a brand ambassador because, again, going back to someone new turns 21 every minute, every second, every day, and someone ages out of drinking. So always have a brand ambassador. Um, it's really going to depend on your budget as to how often you can have them work for you. And when should you cut them? Well, if they're doing a good job for you, never. You should always have them working for you, no matter how big you get. Um, Coca-Cola still has television commercials. Why? We call, in some places, soda, we refer to it as Coke. You would think, well, who the heck needs to be advertised about I mean, nobody, right? Well, of course, because again, 2 seconds ago, someone just became old enough to make their own purchasing choices and want to drink a soda. Again, someone who just turned 21 this morning is maybe, or they're 25 and they've been newly introduced to whiskey, they're going to start making their own purchasing decisions. Who are they going to go to? You want to be that influence. So if you have a brand ambassador that is clearly, you can't measure anything they've done, you don't feel they're doing a good job for you, cut them immediately. But if they are doing a good job, if your brand is growing at a steady pace, if it's healthy, if you are retaining placements, you don't even have to be gaining new placements and new buyers for a while. As long as you're retaining them, you have good relationships with them, you see repeat sales, you will pick up new consumers as well. But if you can't measure, if you don't see evidence of what this person's work is doing for you, then it's not working. You need to find someone new. Any other questions that I can answer at this point for you? Okay, well, if we don't have any further questions, I am very easy to find. You can find me at my website, sailorguevara.com. You can find me on Instagram as Sailor Guevara. You can find me on Facebook as Sailor Guevara, on LinkedIn as Sailor Guevara, and you can find my email through my website as well. I'm happy to help answer your questions. I'm happy to lend resources, finding the right people for you to work with, or just understanding the parameters of how to hire the right person for you, or helping myself if I can. So thank you all so much for attending this webinar. Thank you to those who will be watching it later. I really appreciate you showing up. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be here with you, and I hope you much success with your brand. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.